I am Sara Egge, and I am a professor of history at Centre College in Danville, Kentucky. So what it means to do history is to see evidence in the world of the past and wonder about it. And then take that sense of wonder, that curiosity, and go find more evidence to really figure out exactly what you're seeing and why it's meaningful. I think that, to me, is the ultimate kind of process that gets you involved in history. I would say my argument is that there was a profoundly significant movement for women's suffrage in the Midwest. It was built out of small towns and communities where women experienced community action in terms of civic engagement. And then they honed those political identities by building up their communities, by working in all of these associations to demand the vote. And then at the height of that was World War I, which really cemented that argument that not only were they civic leaders, but they were patriots at a time of war. And so that ultimately pushed them over the top to get, finally, in the Midwest and in the nation, women the right to vote. I did research at the State Historical Society of Iowa, but I also went to Spencer, Iowa, and I went to the local historical society, and I spent time like combing through boxes in one of their closets. And I found minute books of the Federated Women's Society there, and that was the suffrage association for that county. And I was astounded. They didn't even know they had them, or they really weren't sure what they were. And when I pulled them out, I was like, oh my gosh, here's the women talking about the canvassing they're doing and the work that they're doing. And then I coupled it with news reports, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, just the vibrancy in 1916 during the campaign. And here are these women who wrote about it themselves. And I had no other records like that. So I really hope that high schoolers across Iowa go to their local community historical sites and museums and archives and take a look, because you never know what's in that closet. You just don't have a clue until you open the box and you see what kinds of amazing stories are in there. What I love about history, too, is that you think you're doing something on women's suffrage. Then I ended up doing a ton with the history of immigrants and the history of citizenship, and my current scholarship now engages with the history of citizenship and naturalization. So it's like history is limitless because you can kind of go in whatever direction. I love to say, like, if you love economics, do that. If you love politics, do that. History lets you do everything. And you kind of follow the path, which I think is just so fun. I feel like I can be nosy in ways that I couldn't maybe be in real life, but I get to like poke and see what people were doing and what their thoughts were. And I get to really explore their private thoughts as well as their public thoughts and see how they connect or don't connect. And then explore those questions of why. For me, it's always why. Why do we do what we do? We are so complex. Human nature is so bizarre sometimes. And I love to kind of get at those things, like, because I think it helps us better understand ourselves. And what I always say too is that we ask better questions when we understand how people asked those questions or similar questions in the past. And so ultimately, I think it's about telling an amazing story. In the end, you're sort of building this out of evidence, answering a question, but you're doing it with an argument that is a narrative of how this unfolded. Those two big questions of inquiry are really how and why. And so that research process, as it's unfolding, is trying to get at how did this thing happen? How did this change occur? But also then why? What were the impulses? What were the reasons? You know, people are weird. Like, what were they thinking? Or was it totally rational? Usually not. So those are the kinds of things that I really want to explore as I kind of develop that research process. The kind of nuts and bolts are you go to the archive, you take notes, copious notes, or you take pictures or copies, depending on the rules. So you just amass this massive bundle of evidence that you just go through. And then you just let yourself imagine. I think one of the things that I love is I get to put myself in someone else's shoes and try to picture like what it would be like for them. So if they're weird, why are they weird? Like, how can I better understand myself by trying to understand this person's viewpoints and perspectives? And so it's all of those things coming together. And then you get feedback from people. I think that's the final big point, is that you're never doing this alone, right? I have colleagues, I have friends, people who work on similar topics to me. So I share my research with them and they say, yeah, that's cool. What about this? Or what about that? Or what do you mean by this? Or can you be more precise? And so you work together collaboratively, because ultimately everybody wants the same thing, is to kind of build that field and then tell the story and stories to a wide public so that we then better collectively understand our past.